Unlike some other years in Lent, I didn't plan this as a sermon series necessarily. I just kind of took the lectionary as it came. But the pattern of this Lenten series of sermons has been all about the primacy of faith and what faith is, what it means, what believing in God is, and what believing in God does. Last week, we expanded that to what makes us unable to see and acknowledge the truth, because sometimes we can believe and know the wrong things about Jesus. Things that limit our perspective. Things that limit our faith, because it usually causes us to see that God is less than what God actually is. Jesus less than who Jesus is. Because the truth is that God and Jesus are the same, and their power is without limit. That's the truth. Remember, the foundation of our faith is that God is the creator of all things. And his power speaks things into existence. Let there be light, and it is light. That's a powerful image of complete and total power. In the ancient world, it was accepted that when a king spoke a decree, that was all. It was. Remember the Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston, and how many times the Pharaoh, whether it's the old Pharaoh or Ramses, would say, "So let it be written," and then they would echo, "So let it be done." That is the finality of speech. You're saying, I have spoken, the discussion is over, what my will is has been expressed, and therefore it will come to be. The idea of God as creator who speaks, "Let there be light," and it is light, takes that same idea but places it above to the very height, the very existence, the very being of things. That God can speak things into their being. Bottom line, God speaks and things are, without limit, without question. As we have said, this is part of the foundation of that we mean when we say faith, believing that that is true. The other, that Jesus is one and the same as God, is also part of that foundation. And that piece is what we see missed again and again in all of these encounters in John's Gospel. Whether it was Nicodemus, the Pharisees, or others who cannot acknowledge the fullness of Jesus' identity as the Messiah, Son of God, begotten, not made, co-equal and eternal with the Father, creator of heaven and earth. Right? Those are all of the faith words, the words of our faith that we use when we describe who Jesus is. And Nicodemus and the Pharisees and others that are encountering Jesus cannot understand that fullness. The reality is, those are the words of our faith, but the reality is so much harder to lean into, the fullness of that, and build our lives upon it, because anything less than that fullness is the beginning of what we call idolatry, things that we build in place of God. This is the faith that the woman at the well comes to. This is the faith that the blind man comes to. And this is the faith that eventually the disciples come to and testify to in what we call this New Testament. The faith that Jesus is the same as God, that Jesus is God, and that God created all things. But here in this gospel, John's gospel, we see that faith developing. It's developing. So it's not fully there, even for those people who want to believe, who are trying to follow, who are beginning to see. But as Christ says, faith, even as small as a mustard seed. So even the beginnings of faith, even the beginning is enough to move a mountain. But the limitations, these limitations, they're not necessarily a lack of faith per se, but instead they are a belief in the wrong thing. There is a subtle difference there between having no faith and having faith in the wrong thing. Doubt allows for the mustard seed to grow. Some aspect of your mind that is not made up allows for the mustard seed to grow, to flourish. It allows the question that breaks the cycle of delusion. It allows for openness to be answered. Those are the positives of doubt, actually. Full faith in the wrong thing, as we looked at last week, can be a barrier to true faith, as we have seen. But this story, the raising of Lazarus, shows Jesus and Jesus' power to overcome both, to bring people to true faith. Because in this encounter with Lazarus and his sisters, he confronts the limits to their faith directly. Let's look at the story. Now, this story encompasses all of chapter 11, so I'm going to be basically preaching from all of chapter 11, even though we only read part of it. We know the basics, right? Lazarus is the one who Jesus loved. That is right there in the beginning. It's an interesting moniker, though, in the Gospel of John. This is kind of a side note, because we see that phrase, the one who Jesus loved, 6 different times, other than this one. John 13:23, at the Last Supper, one disciple, the one who Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. John 19:26, while on the cross, Jesus entrusts his mother Mary to the disciple who Jesus loved. John 20, verse 2, this disciple is mentioned when Mary Magdalene finds the empty tomb. John 21:7, the disciple recognizes the risen Lord by the Sea of Galilee, the one who Jesus loved. John 21:20-24, this text explicitly states that this same disciple is the one who testifies to these events and wrote them down. Right? So this one who Jesus loved is the writer of this gospel. It's traditionally claimed that this disciple that Jesus loved is John the Apostle. Because it is also traditional to claim that John's gospel was written by John. Right? But there are historically differing opinions on this. And these are not new. They have been going on for the last 2,000 years of this. That are credible to the gospel itself. One is to claim that this disciple who Jesus loved is Mary Magdalene herself, which is interesting and packed with controversies. It's embedded in the picture. We have that picture a bunch of different places in this church. The picture of the Last Supper, painting of the Last Supper painted by Leonardo da Vinci. People wonder why the person, the disciple sitting next to Jesus, appears to be a woman. And that's part of that answer. There's a book called The Da Vinci Code and a movie called The Da Vinci Code that sent all kinds of people into hysterics about it. But that is a historically option that people have put forward. The other historical opinion is interesting. It's that Lazarus is the disciple who Jesus loved, because this phrase is here in the gospel. Jesus, the one you love, is sick. So this is another time where this phrase, the one you love, is used. And it's not attributed to the other 6. It's attributed to Lazarus. Is it possible that Lazarus is that disciple that Jesus loved? Again, I don't think too much of this thought, except that it's interesting to think about how Lazarus would indeed have a unique experience of Jesus to reflect on. Having been one who had died and was brought back to life. That's a powerful image. It's going to be interesting to hear what he would have to say. But I think it only works as a momentary thought. It only works as like a thought experiment to give a little insight into this gospel, but then we get back to the real world and it's John's gospel. The name John is attached to it. So having spent a moment there just to think this through, let's look at the details again. Lazarus is sick. Jesus loves him, but he does not go to him directly. Instead, he says, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Remember, this phrase is important, because it's exactly the same thing that Jesus said last week when we were talking about the man born blind from birth. He says that it's not about sin, but it's that the glory of God may be shown through him. So he's echoing the exact same phrase. So we see again that this miracle is framed like the other one, that it is to show the power of God, to reestablish faith in the limitless power of God. That's what's going on here. Nobody had ever healed a man blind from birth, and God does. Nobody has raised somebody from the dead, but God will. The glory and the limitless power of God is going to be shown. But this time, it isn't the Pharisees that Jesus is correcting, but instead Lazarus' sisters, who, they know Jesus, and they are faithful. They have faith. They are just going to have to face the full glory of God being revealed to them. And that's a lot to deal with. And this is defined by one of the strangest sentences that you will ever come across in the entire Bible if you read it literally. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Let me read that again so that you can get how ridiculous it is. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. He loved them, and he stayed longer where he was. That's one thing that's strange about it. But what really makes it strange is the word in the middle, the coordinated conjunction so, which connects the beginning, that he loved them, to the purpose of him loving them was that he would stay, or that they're connected. He loved them, so he stayed a few extra days. Does that seem counter to what you normally would do when you find out that someone is sick and you love them? You get the call, and if you love them, you go. I remember there was an episode of Seinfeld where Elaine gets dumped by her boyfriend because of this very thing. She was arriving at the movies when she got the message that her date was in an accident. But then she goes and buys some juji fruits from the counter. And when she shows up in the hospital, the guy's like, where'd you get those juji fruits? And she's like, well, she's like, didn't they tell you that I was in an accident when you first got to the movies? And she was like, yeah, but I just figured. It's like, you mean you heard I was in an accident and you stopped off for juji fruits? If I heard you were in an accident, I wouldn't have stopped off for juji fruit. And then she's like, do you want one? Jesus does worse. Because it's not just like stopping off for juicy fruits. He waits a couple of days. And so when he arrives, it says, Lazarus has already been in the tomb 2 days. So we're talking officially dead. Not Princess Bride mostly dead, but all dead. And possibly in the beginnings of the stages of decay. It's just a data point that we get later. This is a real earthy, and you could even say pungent story. Martha hears Jesus is coming, so she rushes out 2 miles to meet him and says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. So there's faith in her statement about what can God do, whatever is asked, but there is also limitations. It is the first limit that I'm going to talk about in this story. That is the limit of geography. Right? Jesus must be there. He must be in person. And if he isn't there, there's nothing that he can do. He can't heal from 2 miles away. He can't heal from another town. If you had been here, this wouldn't have happened, but you weren't. But then Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. That's what I'm going to call the doctrinal limitation. And it even starts with our favorite word from last week, which is, I know. I know, I had learned, I had been taught. I know that there will be a point in time when my brother will rise, but that can't be now, because that goes against everything that I know. Jesus challenges this limitation with an important phrase. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. It has all the marks of the power of John's gospel. It begins with I am, which is evocative of the name of God given to Moses. I am that I am. And Jesus does this 7 times in the gospel, this one being, I am the resurrection and the life. That's a lofty claim. I embody all these things. I am the resurrection, so the idea that the resurrection is sometime in the future is not the case necessarily. I'm it. I can do that. I embody all of these things that you know. Put down your knowledge and lay it on me, because I am the fulfillment of this that you know. I could do a whole sermon on just that line. I am the resurrection and the life. But we go forward. Jesus is breaking them. So far we have a geographical limit, and now we have a doctrinal limit. And now it's time for the other sister's turn, Mary. Mary says to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's a recounting of the geographical limitation. If you had been here, you'd have the power to keep my brother alive. But again, the limitation was of space or area or geography. But the implied limitation here is the life and death one. Death is final. You would have had to stop death before it happened. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now that it's happened, it's too late. This is the timing limitation. Death is final. 2 days have passed. It's too late for God to act now. Geography, doctrinal, now time. The last people to speak about limitations are the people that are assembled. John calls them the Jews. They say, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? They echo that same idea that death is finality. It's just too late. He could have done it, but it's too late. They even heard of his other miracle, right? He opened the eyes of a blind man. He did what no one had ever done before, but he can't do anything here and now because he missed his time and death is final. He could have, but again, it's too late. Now think of this in the context of how faith works throughout the Bible. So many times biblical characters are shown miracles, but they can't get from that last miracle to the next one without falling apart. Sure, God did that, but this is way too much, even for God. Israelites in the desert, they saw plagues, they saw the Red Sea parting, they saw pillars of fire, they saw water pouring from a rock, they saw manna falling from heaven, and again, in between those, they lose their minds, and they lose their faith. There's always doubt. So it's difficult to get from one miracle and still believe in the fact of the next one. The disciples echo this same pattern. They see miracles and healings after another. They see walking on water. They see feeding of multitudes. But each time, they have no ability to see from one miracle to the next one. So they find themselves in doubt. Looking back at the last miracle does not help look forward to the next. This is the truth here in this story as well. We can relate in our lives too. It's so human. We can relate to the limitations to our faith in the same way. Geographic limitation. You had to be here, God, but you are far away. God is far, God is silent, God is not here. So it could have happened, but it didn't. The doctrinal limitation. We know this about God. We've been studying about God in the Bible the whole time. He has done so many things, but this moment here in my life, this is new and different, and so God can't do anything about it. The time limitation. It's just too late. There's no way it's going to change. You could have done something about this God. You could have done something about this Jesus, but you didn't, and now you can't, so I have lost all hope. And then the death limitation. Death is final. There's no question, death is final, and beyond death, there is no hope. We share these. It is to these limitations that Jesus does two things here that are really important. The first thing that he does is he weeps. Is this what he weeps about? That the human plight, that we just cannot see a miracle for what it is and build our faith and foundation upon it, upon God's limitless power. That we can't see all the miracles in our lives and then look to the future with faith instead of fear. That all of these limits are in our minds, that it's not at all connected to how God works. Jesus cries, wondering when we're going to get it. He feels that pain so personally. He understands it so well. He empathizes, and it makes him cry. It actually reminds us of when Jesus cries over Jerusalem, saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, when will you ever?" Jesus' prayer for the people later in this gospel as well. Take a look this week sometime at John chapter 17 and read Jesus' prayer for the people. You'll see this reflected, the same idea, the same sadness, wondering when we'll ever get it. We can understand Jesus' weeping here with much more context. That Jesus' love for us is so amazing in depth that it's founded in the feelings of our very pain. That's the first thing that Jesus does that's important. The second thing that he does is he raises Lazarus from death. He raises Lazarus from death to reveal to them the glory of God for their faith. Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and the stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." One last appeal to those limitations, right? One last appeal. How death is final, how the body would be breaking down, how the time has passed for any good to have been done. You might even call this a new limitation. The limitation of the flesh, right? The body and its death are final. It's just too much for them, and the smell of death is insurmountable. Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you were always with me." Listen to Jesus. I know you always hear, and I know that there are no limits to where you are, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. So it's every aspect of this is for their benefit. Believe in me and believe in the one who sent me, that we are one, and that there just are no limitations about what God can do and what God is doing. If there are things that we don't understand, if there is pain that we feel, if there are questions that we have about this or that, or that we're experiencing great suffering or the way through, God is working and his glory will be shown through it all. It's a powerful message. The story continues. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." The power of this story is that it systematically removes each of these limitations. Any limitations that we might impose on the power of God. So let's drive this forward 2,000 years. What aspects of our lives and our faith need to be reminded and need to hear this story? I have many doubts, fears, worries, concerns, times that I would limit what God has the ability to do. And I would guess that all of you do as well. Jesus doesn't just break through the limitations, though. He also leads them to faith. That's what's so beautiful about the story. He doesn't just say faith is an expectation and he leaves it there. No, he listens. He knows. He cares. He weeps. There is so much grace here abounding. But at the end of their day, it's their faith that he is encouraging. And they are led to faith by Jesus, through his teachings, through his promises, his delivering, his grace, and then finally the miracle. The story doesn't just say this is what faith is and tells you to do it. Jesus leads them all the way through towards that moment. And I pray, asking Jesus, Lord, may we be moved personally and completely, step by step, and day by day, to this full faith that you are leading us to. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, when we read a story like this, we can be overcome by the power of your miracle. Help us to see that there are no limitations to your power, that if you can do